to edit this video.
I think we should release it like this, because this is us. So how long have we been married?
Over 25 years.
Alright, and what does it mean to cleave unto each other and none else?
Well, it means a lot of things, but the first thing that comes to my mind is when you have something to share or something important or something you need, you go to your spouse first. Sometimes when I need to purchase something or need help with something, even if that's not necessarily something that my spouse can fulfill, I will go and talk to my spouse first about how to go about doing it. So he's my first responder to all things. That's what it means to me as far as how I perceive it in my own brain.
Gotcha. I actually don't like the word cleave because it has two meanings that are opposite. One is to bind together, and the other one is to separate, like a cleaver or a knife. And it's just an interesting word, but for me, it's being bound. And I think what you're talking is the fruit of being bound. In other words, you go to that person for all of those things because you're bound to that person. And go ahead.
I agree with that.
Yeah. The hard thing is, as a couple coming together, we've been together 25 plus years, but when we first started out, we had those that we used that we were bound to before for things. And do you mind if we share the brake story?
No.
Okay. I don't know how long we'd been married. It had to be for a couple years. I needed to replace the brakes on the car, and it's an area that you didn't know whether or not I had any expertise. And brakes, important you get it right. It was the summer, and I wanted to do it at my parents' house because I could pull the car into the garage and work out of the sun. And so I'm over at my folks' place, and I'm working on the brakes, and you asked me if I should call your dad. And I distinctly remember going, no, why would I call your dad? I'm just working on the brakes. And I said no. And then the next thing I know, your dad shows up. So that's my recollection. What's your recollection? How did it?
You're right. I wasn't knowledgeable or confident in your ability to do stuff because I didn't. Yeah, we were married, but I didn't really know you.
Yeah.
Honestly, I didn't know your ins and outs, and I knew my dad. I knew my dad knew how to fix brakes, and I trusted him to be able to do it and to do it right, and I didn't have that trust with you yet. And I made the mistake of trust, my definition of trust being, I've experienced this with this person before and I know that they're capable of doing it, not I'm choosing to trust that my husband knows what he's doing and letting him experience this, whether he knows how to do it or not, whether it works or not. I'm gonna choose to trust him. So there's two different trusts for me. There's the one that's built on something, and then there's the one that I choose to do.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
So it's like almost faith. There's a faith trust of, you know what, I have faith that in the end it's going to be okay. I'm going to trust them. And then the other one is I have so much experience, I don't need the faith. I just know that they got this. They have that down. Okay, so in this case, you didn't have the experience. I had never replaced the brakes, and
right.
on our vehicles before.
And I hadn't made the decision to trust you. I hadn't made that decision to say, if he fails, that's okay. I'm willing to let him try this and to exercise my trust in him.
Yeah, what's the worst that can happen? Bad brakes. It's not like you need to stop with a 2,000-pound car.
Well, it would be obvious if it's not like we would die because you would test them for you. Something similar happened when we lived in the Artesian house where you were like, hey, I'm going to take this wall down. And I was like, what? No. Because that wasn't something that you just do in my experience. You plan it out. You stew over it for months before you act on anything. And you were just like, I'm taking this wall down. And then you did it, and it turned out really good. And so I was starting to develop that understanding of, you say that you can do things and you actually can do them, even if I don't understand, even if I don't have a firm understanding of how. And so I did start to develop the trust as far as the experience goes. But I think it's important for new couples to have the conversation with someone who has years of experience in marriage to talk to them about, how do you cleave unto your spouse? Because there's things that you've experienced too with me where you're like, do I trust this? Do I trust my wife painting my child's mouth purple? I don't know what things that you've had to work on or been scared about, because you're better at exercising trust than I am.
And I think that comes down to the choice aspect, because I was scared of heights. I was terrified of heights growing up, and sometimes I just had to deal with it. And the scripture that would come to my mind is, trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean not upon thine own understanding.
Right.
And so for me, that proverb is what I would say in my mind before I had to step out onto a ledge or step close to the edge of something that would have a railing just high enough to get me spinning on my way down. That's what I would imagine. It was horrible. And so in the same way, when we got married, I chose to trust your judgment because, one, I would rather put my trust in you as a couple, and weighing the downside, it was a calculation. Putting ginseng violet, is that what it was? Gentian violet on the inside of the kids' mouths when they had thrush. It looked bizarre, but what was I didn't know any different, and so there was not going to be any harm, and it allowed me to draw or cleave unto you and none else. I didn't call my mom up and say, hey mom, my wife's putting up this. The ultimate betrayal, by the way, would have been me to call my mom and say, Mom, Sarah is putting purple dye on the inside of your grandbabies, right? That would have been horrible, because that's me proclaiming that her relationship with our kid is more important than our relationship with each other, and that your priorities were not for your own child, were at a lesser than my mom's for her grandbabies. So and I know that's not a normal logic tree, but that's how my mind works. Is
well, and I'm curious as to how you mentioned that scripture of trust in the Lord thy God, which, yeah, trust in the Lord thy God. He's all knowing, he's all powerful. That's a little bit easier to do than to trust in a man who has faults and who makes mistakes.
Sure.
But how I do feel that when we got married, I was less
Cleavey.
mature. I didn't have a lot of training or knowledge about relationships. I just knew what I saw. I knew what I observed, and it was never a conversation of, I never had conversations with my parents about this is how relationships work, and this is, you have relationship talks with your kids all the time. I didn't have those. All I had was observation. That's a good thing. That's a bad thing. That in my own perception, there was no, I didn't really think about it. So how, when we got married, how did you already know how to do that because you were good at it? You didn't ever call your mom when you were frustrated or didn't know what to do. You talked to me, but I called my dad a lot and my sisters, and I was like, I don't know what to do here, and so I was less mature, and I don't know I don't know why. I don't know what
think
that's based on.
some of it is that my mom told me that, hey, when you get married, she's first, I'm second. And she didn't say I'm second. She just said your wife is first, right? And so make sure you get a good one. And so I did that. Cross that one off the to-do list. And then it was all about building that eternal relationship that was supposed to last beyond this world. And I know it sounds sappy, but I really did measure things based on the longevity of the consequence. And when it is eternal, that means all the physical things, all of these things here in mortality, they all are submissive to the eternal perspective. And for me getting married, we were being married for time and all eternity. So even if it resulted in the death of a child, which would be tragic and horrific and awful, that is our marriage together for time and eternity. And that outlook is the touchstone, the benchmark, the ruler that I weighed everything else out. And having my mom have those lessons that I'm doing with our kids was very helpful, so that I knew that, yes, I could go to her, but she would never, number one, never has she ever spoken against you. Not once. Even, I'm sure she's held back because she's human and you're human, and I'm sure that she disagrees with some things, but it's always her desire for me and you is the same that I have for us, which is eternal. And so if I didn't feel comfortable going to her because she had let me know, hey, this is, you're choosing to marry her for eternity, she's first. So cleave unto her and none else. In other words, you can't rely on me for that. And is she there when I'm down? Of course. Do I call her? Yes. Do I talk to her about business and advice? Absolutely. I'd be stupid not to. However, I cleave unto you only. So I rely on you. And for all the judgment stuff, the trust aspects, it was a decision, in the same way that I would decide to get closer to an edge when I was petrified and my body would be shaking as I would get closer. And then I'd break out into hives. But yeah, that's how it was for me. So when we got married, I didn't have to change. It was, oh, I'm now married. I have to shift this devotion and trust and cleaving from my parents to my spouse, and the none else. That was the part that would resonate. If I would, and even when I'd go to them, I'd have to remember not to go beyond a certain point, because that would not be none else, that I would be essentially going to them and cleaving unto them instead of you. And, you know, I have trusted friends and I have trusted family, but it's different when it's cleaving.
Yeah. I had to learn it over time in our marriage, but I could explain it better to the kids now as we're raising them and as they have questions. But it isn't that you don't have other people or other influences in your life. It's just that your spouse knows about all of it. And if there's ever a case where you're having a relationship with someone outside of your marriage where you're more intimate than you are with your spouse, that's a huge red flag.
Yeah.
Because even if it's a parent, even if it's one of your parents and you have a more intimate relationship where you talk to them about everything and you share everything and you're not sharing those things with your spouse, that is a red flag, because that means you're not cleaving to your spouse and they're not number one. So that's a problem.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I did learn that after we got married.
Yeah, and I think we've cleaved to each other really well, especially during these times of trial. Nobody knows about all of it. I guess we're going to be recording videos so that then everybody will know, but that's a weird thing to think about.
Maybe not everything. I don't know.
I can only think of two things that I will not be sharing. Two.
Okay. Well,
and you know what one of them is. I win.
The lycra suit.
If you're gonna bring up the lycra suit, I'm gonna bring up our honeymoon.
We're gonna have to edit this video.
I think we should release it like this, because this is us bargaining and oh man. The one thing that I want to just wrap this up with is, as hard as it is to cleave unto your spouse and none else, it's worth it.
It's worth it.